Hello, and welcome to the Critical Thinking course. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Katie, and I am glad to present this course on behalf of our team at Talent Zoom. As we all know, in today's society, all of us experience information overload. We are bombarded with messages to believe various ideas, purchase things, support causes, and lead our lifestyle in a particular way. How do you know what to believe? In this overload, how do you separate the truth from the myths? The answer lies in critical thinking skills, the ability to clearly reason through problems, and to present arguments in a logical, compelling way has become a key survival in today's world. So, this course will give you some practical tools and hands-on experience with critical thinking and problem solving. By the end of this course, you will be able to define critical and non-critical thinking, identify your critical thinking styles, including areas of strength and improvement, describe other thinking styles, including left or right brain thinking and whole brain thinking, work through the critical thinking process to build or analyze arguments, develop and evaluate explanations, improve key critical thinking skills, including active listening and questioning, use analytical thought systems and creative thinking techniques, prepare and present powerful arguments. So, shall we get started? Let's dive right in, and I wish you a happy learning. As face value and react. A critical thinker would see. So, what is critical thinking? According to the 21st Century Lexicon, critical thinking is the mental process of actively and skillfully conceptualizing, applying, analyzing, synthesizing, and evaluating information to reach an answer or conclusion. In other words, it's about using a specific set of systems and tools to look at a problem, find several alternatives, and choose the best one. In order to understand critical thinking, let's compare it to non-critical thinking. Let's look at a simple example. You're working on a project with a team of coworkers. You are at lunch one day when one of them comes up to you in a complete panic and says, "I've heard that the CEO isn't happy about our approach. If we don't change course, we'll all be fired soon." A non-critical thinker might accept this statement as face value and react. A critical thinker would look at the different parts of their coworker's statement and evaluate it objectively, considering both the statement's correctness and relevance. One of the key ideas being critical thinking is logic. If your argument is logical, a reasonable person should be able to follow your line of thinking and reach the same conclusion, or at least see how you got there. For example, suppose that I give you these two statements. All fruit is good for you. Apples are fruit. What conclusion would you come to? Now let's consider some benefits of critical thinking. A well-cultivated critical thinker raises vital questions and problems, formulating them clearly and precisely, gathers and assesses relevant information, using abstract ideas to interpret it effectively, comes to well-reasoned conclusions and solutions, testing them against relevant criteria and standards, thinks open-mindedly within alternative systems of thought, recognizing and assessing their assumptions, implications, and practical consequences, and communicates effectively with others in figuring out solutions to complex problems. Critical thinking is, in short, self-directed, self-disciplined, self-monitored, and self-corrective thinking. It presupposes assent to rigorous standards of excellence and mindful command of their use. It entails effective communication and problem-solving abilities, and a commitment to overcome our native egocentrism and sociocentrism. By the way, when talking about critical thinking, we're going to use some special terms. So, please look at this slide. Today, let's consider left and right brain thinking, as well as whole brain thinking. The concept of different characteristics for the left and right brain was explored and explained by scientist Roger Sperry. His theory can be summed up in his own words. The great pleasure and feeling in my right brain is more than my left brain can find the words to tell you. So, think of it this way. With only the left side of your brain, you would be able to read the word snow, but you wouldn't be able to picture it. Next is whole brain thinking. Have you ever asked yourself, how can people be so clever and so dumb at the same time? We have all met people who are very bright and capable in a given area or skill, but seem totally incapable of something much simpler. The absent-minded genius is a good example. Scientific theory is no problem for this thinker, but socializing at a party is. In business, you often find a strategic, big-picture specialist who never seems to notice details. How does this happen? Research on the brain has led to an understanding that each of us has a preferred way and mode of thinking that affects the way we take in and process information. The awareness of one's own thinking preferences and the thinking preferences of others, combined with the ability to act outside of one's preferred thinking preference, is known as whole brain thinking. The whole brain model was developed by Ned Herman in 1979. It outlines 4 thinking styles. Please have a look at this style. As you can see, there are 4 quadrants that illustrate the thinking preferences of individuals. Thinking preferences have an impact on virtually everything we do, including communication, decision-making, problem-solving, and managing styles. Understanding your thinking style preferences will give you a new perspective of yourself and people you deal with every day. We can use this model as kind of a checklist to ensure we're covering all the bases and thinking critically. Applying whole brain thinking means being able to fully leverage one's own preferences, stretch to other quadrants when necessary, and adapt to and take advantage of the preferences of those around you to improve performance and results. The critical thinking process. Hello, and welcome back. Today, I would like to introduce you the critical thinking model. It is a typical problem-solving model that has 3 phases. Please have a look at this slide. And here is another critical thinking model that has the same basic structure, but focuses on the first 2 phases. Please have a look at this slide. According to the Foundation for Critical Thinking, there are 7 standards that critical thinkers should have in their mindset. These are, number 1 is clarity. Here, ask for illustrations and examples. Get hard facts. Ask the person to elaborate or express the idea in another way. Number 2, relevance and significance. How does that statement connect to the issue? What are the most important parts of the issue, argument, or evidence? Number 3 is logic. Apply common sense. Connect the dots between the points when points clash with each other. Then, accuracy. Look for supporting evidence. Check and double-check the facts. Get first-hand information whenever possible. Depth. Make sure you are not oversimplifying the problem. Are you covering all the issues? Are you covering the most significant issues? Next is precision. Ask for precise measurements, such as 63% rather than over half the population. Watch out for vague words. Breadth. Are you looking at all the points of view? How could you gain more perspective? Look at it through someone else's eyes. For example, your children, your manager, etc. Keep these principles in mind as we work through the critical thinking model. American inventor Charles Kettering once said, "A problem well stated is a problem half solved." Therefore, you need to know what issue you need to evaluate before you start evaluating it. So, the first step in the critical thinking process is to ask yourself, what is the real issue? This can be more complicated than it seems, but it is important to get it right. Remember, an issue can be a problem, a situation, a question, or just about anything else. Here are some tips for identifying the issue. Try writing it as a question that can be answered yes or no. Be neutral and objective. Review the issue statement with others involved to make sure that you have gotten to the core of the problem. If there are one or more issues, separate them out so that you can focus on one thing at a time. Let's look at an example. A coworker says, "Joe quit last week because of the changes in how we schedule vacation. I guess we need to overhaul the system." You could state the issue as, should we evaluate our vacation scheduling system? Now it's your turn. One of your employees privately says to you,
"Our team's workspace is really disruptive and disorganized, and it's affecting my productivity. I want it rearranged right away."
And now decide what is the issue. Our next task is to identify the arguments for and against an issue, and to identify the evidence supporting each argument. Ask yourself, why would a person take that position? If a conclusion has already been reached, we will want to identify that as well. Let's continue with our earlier example. A coworker says, "Joe quit last week because of the changes in how we schedule vacation. I guess we need to overhaul the system." The issue was, should we evaluate our vacation scheduling time? One argument is yes, we should evaluate the current vacation scheduling system. Evidence for this could include facts like the number of complaints about the system from scheduling staff. On the no side, you could have evidence about the phases of change and point out that no one has had time to get comfortable with the system yet. Try identifying possible arguments and evidence for this situation. One of your employees privately says to you,
"Our system's workplace is really disruptive and disorganized, and it's affecting my productivity. I want it rearranged right away."
Issue. Is the current workspace configuration affecting team productivity? Now, look at the issue, arguments, and evidence. When we have a good grasp on the argument, evidence, and conclusions, let's look at the environmental factors around them. First, let's explore the context of the argument. Questions you will want to ask include, what are the presenter's purpose? Does the presenter have a personal agenda? Does the presenter have a relationship with you that they are trying to change? Are they trying to get rid of a problem? How was the message conveyed? Were others meant to hear it? Were they trying to distance themselves from the message, for example, sending an email rather than speaking to you face to face? Whose turf was the message delivered on? What other factors are present? Person's status in the company, recent changes at home or work, etc. Let's continue with our earlier example. A coworker says, Joe quit last week because of the changes in how we schedule vacation. I guess we need to overhaul the system. What contextual elements would affect this argument? If you're having trouble identifying the context of a message, try imagining it coming from someone else or through a different medium. Checking credibility and consistency. Credibility. The next thing that you must evaluate is the argument and evidence's credibility. In other words, can you believe this person or not? Some things that you will want to find out are: how did the person find out the information? Firsthand, secondhand, or beyond? What kind of background does the person have about the subject? How likely is their evidence? Is there other evidence, such as documents or witnesses? Does your background and observations support their statement? Continuing with the example of Joe, you'd probably feel differently about your coworker's statement, depending on whether the coworker had spoken to Joe themselves or overheard someone else talking about it in the lunchroom. Next is consistency. Finally, look through the argument for consistency. This is particularly important for formal reports, long emails, or complex documents. You want to look for statements that contradict each other, or that are true but not relevant. For exercise, please have a look at this case study. Find out conflicting statements in the following argument. Topic: changing cafeteria offerings. I believe that we should change our cafeteria's caterer from McSpud to Freshco. Although 90% of our workers are generally healthy and in a good weight range, I feel that Freshco offers healthier options. I feel that a healthier workforce will increase productivity and morale. Freshco has been in operation since 1979 and offers dozens of different types of sandwiches and salads. They have helped over 50 other companies and could certainly help the 25% of our workforce that is overweight. Freshco is also cheaper, and meals can be made faster. At the end, evaluating arguments. Finally, we have gathered enough information to evaluate the argument and decide on its strength. The 5 key questions you will need to ask are: is the evidence straightforward and precise? How does the context affect the argument? Are all pieces of evidence consistent with each other? Is the evidence credible? Do all pieces of the evidence support the conclusion? Now it's your turn. Please have a look at this slide and complete this critical thinking worksheet. A critical thinker's skill set. The 2 most basic elements of good communication are asking questions and listening to others. Our first topic will be asking good questions. There are 2 kinds of questions: open and closed. Closed questions are those that can be answered by either yes or no, or with a specific bit of data, such as your name, date of birth, or occupation. These questions restrict our responses and give us little opportunity to develop our thoughts. As a result, they require little effort and can even close down a conversation. This type of question tends to get overused, partially because they require very little effort on the questioner's part as well. They are easy to phrase, and we get quick answers. Unfortunately, such questions also can lead us to assume, and assumptions can be big barriers to critical thinking. Open questions, on the other hand, encourage people to talk. These questions are phrased so they cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. Open questions often begin with a variation of the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, or can ask how. These questions are used to get information, focus conversations, solicit opinions, gain consensus. So, closed questions begin the closing process, but The unintentional use of a closed question can often be overcome by the simple expedient of following it with a simple open question. For example, do you feel that was the right thing to do? Yes, I do. Can you help me understand why you feel that way? There are several different types of open-ended questions. The most useful are probing questions that search for more information and investigate in more detail. Your role is to draw out information that will give you a better picture of the situation. Most of us are better at presenting our own point of view than we are at drawing out information from others. A good name for this skill of gathering information from others is probing. When you probe, you get others involved and participating. Since probes are designed to produce a response, it's unlikely the other person will remain passive. Get important information on the table. People may not volunteer information, or the information they present may not be clear. Your probes will help people open up and present or clarify their information. Force yourself to listen. Since probes are most effective in a sequence, you have to listen to a person's response. Help improve communication on both sides of the table. Keep in mind, there are 5 ways to probe other people. One of the most common ways of probing is to ask an open question, such as, "Can you describe that more clearly? Would you give me a specific example of what you mean? What do you think we should do?" The difficulty here is that if you ask too many of these, the other person begins to feel like they are under interrogation. A second, very effective way of probing is a pause. Stop talking. Let the other person speak. Let them fill the silence. A third way is to ask a reflective or mirroring question. For example, the person has just said, "What I really want is more variety in my work." And you may respond by just reflecting back to them. Variety? The reflective question usually provides you with an expanded answer without you appearing to ask more questions. Of course, it is best used in conjunction with a pause. Reflective questions or statements focus on clarifying and summarizing without interrupting the flow of the conversation. A fourth method that is particularly useful to make certain you are clear about what the individual has said is paraphrasing what has just been said in your own words. For example, "So if I understand you correctly, you can use this response to show that you want to increase the accuracy of your understanding of what has just been said. You may also want to use it to ensure the sender hears what he has just said. Finally, the last method, most often used as a conversation, is winding down, is the summary question. For example, you have tried ignoring the scent of your colleague's cologne. You have talked with him about how it affects your allergies, and you have tried shutting your door to keep the scent from your workspace. None of these have worked, and now you're asking me to intervene. Have I got it right?" Active listening skills. God didn't give us 2 ears and 1 mouth so we could talk twice as much as we listen. Have I got it right? President Franklin D. Roosevelt used to say that people never really listened to what he said. They only kept quiet out of courtesy. Every once in a while, he would test his theory and say something like, "So good to see you. I murdered my grandmother this morning." But he got caught out on one occasion when a woman, who was probably a particularly good listener, nodded gravely before replying, "Mr. President, I'm sure she had it coming to her." The problem is that listening and hearing are not the same thing. Most of us were fortunate to be born with hearing, but listening is a skill that must be learned and practiced and perfected before it can be used successfully. Here are some tips for successful listening. We should listen for names. Listen with interest. Try to get rid of your assumptions. And listen for what isn't said. Listening is hard work. When other people are listening to us, they have the same difficulties we do. So, always be clear to the with 'em. What's in it for me? Active listening has 3 stages. Firstly, nonverbal messages are equally important when communicating. Our nonverbal messages can include the way we stand, what we do with our hands, the sound of our voice, the way we walk, and the expressions on our face. Second stage, verbal cues or phrases such as, "Go on," "Really," and "Then what?" Third stage, questions for clarification or summarizing statements. And here are some active listening tips. As people talk to you, mentally say to yourself, "Which means that," this way, you be clear in your own mind what you hope to achieve. Take the lead in conversations wherever possible. This gives you the psychological advantage and puts you in the stronger position to direct the conversation along lines that are favorable to you. Check your understanding with your 6 helpers: why, what, when, who, and how. And finally, talk less than you listen. Try silence. Defining explanations. Another important part of critical thinking is being able to clearly explain why something is a particular way. Instead of trying to persuade someone to a particular point of view, explanations allow you to understand why something happened, or you may use the explanation framework to evaluate an argument. Explanations focus on causes, where arguments focus on evidence. Arguments can be identified by the presence of evidence, such as hard facts or specific events. Explanations can be identified if they appear as an answer to a question. They often appear in the form of opinions, with phrases like, "I think," or "My guess is," or "In my view." Explanations can, however, be an excellent starting point for arguments. Consider the following issue. Attendance has recently been down during quarterly meetings. An argument could be, an explanation could be. Let's have a look at this exercise. Determine if each statement is an explanation or argument. There is a 4-step cycle that you can use to build an explanation. And we start with gathering information. To start, gather as much information as possible from as many different sources as possible. Be open-minded and make sure not to discard anything right away. Ask yourself, what kind of resources might be useful in this stage? Next is processing information. Once information is gathered, it must be processed. This means categorizing the information, assessing its reliability and credibility, and comparing and contrasting similar pieces of information. Your goal is to make sense of what is in front of you. Developing hypotheses. Now it's time to synthesize the information that you have gathered and process it into some possible explanations. Typically, 3 to 5 tentative hypotheses is a good number to aim for. Not too few to restrict yourself, but not too many to overwhelm you. Try asking yourself these questions. How might someone else explain this? Step back from the data and look at the big picture. What does it tell you? And finally, testing hypotheses. Finally, it's time to test and evaluate your hypotheses. Ask yourself, does this hypothesis account for all the evidence? Does the hypothesis make sense? Is it believable? Why is it better than the other alternatives? Keep in mind that, based on the results, you may need to return to a previous phase in the cycle. Common sense. Everyone must have a rational, well-thought-out approach to solving problems. Common sense and critical thinking both play a role in problem solving, as well as how people regard life situations, and each other. Common sense and critical thinking, however, differ in their approach and level of operation. Common sense is innate rational thinking that occurs organically in rational humans. Common sense involves thinking and problem-solving skills developed from intuition, natural logic, and the human ability to observe events and absorb information and lessons from them. These observations allow you to learn from experience and thus to hone and implement sound judgment. You use common sense to approach and attempt to solve problems in day-to-day life. Every human being gains and uses common sense to apply impartial, unbiased, and responsible logical decisions. On the other hand, critical thinking occurs when a person deliberately examines a situation based on his own knowledge and philosophies. Critical thinking involves judging a situation based on studied reasoning, where the person intentionally and consciously focuses on a subject. The quality of critical thinking is based on how sound the eventual judgment of a situation is. Critical thinking allows for planning, calculating, investigating, and explaining. You use it for situations that require a larger degree of concentration and deliberation. So, let's have a look at some differences and similarities. Common sense is, by definition, a sound conclusion. Critical thinking, on the other hand, can be either sound or unsound. Mistakes in logic can be made through critical thinking. Critics are not always right, and their conclusions can be colored by their own prejudices. Another point of difference lies in the levels of awareness at which both consciousness and critical thinking operate. Critical thinking always occurs at a conscious level, whereas common sense occurs on a liminal level of thought. And similarities. Although critical thinking and common sense require different levels of awareness and consciousness to operate, both methods are rational in their arguments, or, at the least, attempts to be rational. Both must adhere to some logical form and logical requirements. Now it's your turn. Think about it. If it takes 10 men 4 days to dig 2 holes, and 5 men 3 days to dig 1 hole, how many men and how long would it take to dig half a hole? Welcome back, guys! Today, we will look at critical and creative thought systems. You might wonder by now how to think creatively. Brainstorming is the first thing that comes to most people's minds when we talk about creative thinking. In a brainstorming session, people need not fear looking foolish, since wild ideas are explicitly encouraged. There is no one right way to run a brainstorming session. Rather, you should tailor it to your needs and resources. In doing so, you may find it useful to consider the following guidelines. So, before brainstorming, define your purpose. Think of what you would like to walk out of the meeting with. Choose the participants. The group should normally be large enough to provide a stimulating interchange, yet small enough to encourage both individual participation and inventing. This usually means between 5 and 8 people. Change the environment. Select a time and place that distinguishes the session as much as possible from regular discussions. The more different a brainstorming session seems from a normal meeting, the easier it is for participants to suspend judgment. Design an informal atmosphere. What does it take for you and others to relax? It may be talking over a drink, meeting at a vacation lodge, or simply taking off your tie and jacket during the meeting. Choose a facilitator. Someone at the meeting needs to facilitate, to keep the meeting on track, to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. And during brainstorming, seat the participants facing the problem side by side. Physically sitting side by side can reinforce the mental attitude of tackling a common problem together. Clarify the ground rules, including the no criticism rule. If the participants do not at all know each other, the meeting begins with introductions all around, followed by clarification of the ground rules. Once the purpose of the meeting is clear, let your imaginations go. Try to come up with a long list of ideas, approaching the question from every conceivable angle. Record the ideas in full view. Recording ideas on large sheets of paper gives the group a tangible sense of collected achievement. It reinforces the no criticism rule. It reduces the tendency to repeat. And it helps stimulate other ideas. And finally, after brainstorming, relax the no criticism rule in order to bring the most promising ideas to the surface. You are still not at the stage of deciding. You are merely nominating ideas worth developing further. Circle the ideas that members of the group think are best. Take one promising idea and invent ways to make it better and more realistic, as well as ways to carry it out. The task at this stage is to make the idea as attractive as you can. Preface constructive criticism with, "What I like best about that idea is," or, "Might it be better if..." At the end, before you break up, draw up a selective and improved list of ideas from the session and set up a time for deciding which of these ideas to advance in your negotiation and how. And now, imagine the opposite. After you complete brainstorming process, write down your idea and then ask people for ways to ensure that it will fail. Write all responses down and then reverse them. For example, I want to write a newsletter about animals that people will read. Then I will ask people, how do I write a newsletter that no one will read? Possible answers can be, use small, unreadable type. Choose topics that aren't relevant to people. Offer impractical advice. Don't include experts. Reversed. Use large, readable type. Choose topics that are relevant to people. Offer practical advice. Include experts. And now, try making a list of your assumptions about the current issue. Ask coworkers to add to the list. Then, rephrase each assumption as an open-ended question. For example, I assume that we will produce 10 widgets each day. Question: how can we make sure we produce 10 widgets each day? Remember, don't reinvent the wheel. When you've solved a problem successfully, or if you hear about a creative solution, write the solution down in a log. Then, when you're having trouble problem solving, refer back to the log to get your creative juices started. You may even be able to take certain elements of different solutions and bring them together to create a solution for your particular problem. De Bono's Thinking Hats. Another process tool is the 6 Thinking Hats, developed by Edward de Bono. The purpose of the 6 Thinking Hats is to unscramble thinking so that a thinker is able to use one thinking mode at a time, instead of trying to do everything at once. The 6 Thinking Hats method is designed to switch thinking away from the normal argument style to a map-making style. This makes thinking a 2-stage process. The first stage is to make the map with information from the various hats. The second stage is to choose a route on the map. If the map is good enough, the best route will often become obvious. So, each of the 6 hats puts one type of thinking on the map. White hat is virgin white, pure facts, figures, and information. Red hat is seeing red, emotions and feelings. Also, hunch and intuition. Black hat, devil's advocate, negative judgment, asks why it will not work. Yellow hat is sunshine, brightness, and optimism. Green hat is fertile, creative, plants springing from seeds, movement, provocation. Blue hat, cool and in control, orchestra conductor, thinking about thinking. The jargon of the 6 thinking hats serves a very useful purpose. It is the very artificiality of the hats which is their greatest value. They provide a formality and a convenience for requesting a certain type of thinking, either of oneself or of others. They establish rules for the game of thinking. Anyone playing the game will be aware of these rules. The more the hats are used, the more they will become part of the thinking culture. Everyone in an organization should learn the basic format so that it can become part of the culture. This makes focused thinking much more powerful. Instead of wasting time in argument or drifting discussion, there will be a brisk and disciplined approach. However, at first, people might feel a little awkward about using the different hats. But this awkwardness soon passes as the convenience of the system becomes apparent. The first use of the hats will be in the form of an occasional request to use one hat or to switch from the black hat to a different color. As people become more comfortable with using the hats, you may want to assign hats to various people at the beginning of a meeting or during a problem-solving session. Value of the 6 thinking hats. The great value of the hats is that they provide thinking roles. A thinker can take pride in play-acting each of these roles. Without the formality of the hats, some thinkers would remain permanently stuck in one mode, usually the black hat mode. Within any organization, the more people who learn the format, the more usable it becomes. The truth is that we do not have a simple language as a control system for our thinking. If we feel that we are intelligent enough to do without such a system, then we should consider that such a system would make that intelligence even more effective. So, let's start with white hat thinking. Imagine a computer that gives the facts and figures for which it is asked. The computer is neutral and objective. It does not offer interpretations or opinions. When wearing the white thinking hat, the thinker imitates a computer. The person requesting the information should use focusing questions in order to obtain information or information gaps. In practice, there is a 2-tiered system of formation. The first tier contains checked and proven facts, first-class facts. The second tier contains facts that are believed to be true, but have not yet been fully checked, second-class facts. There is a spectrum of likelihood ranging from always true to never true. In between, there are usable levels such as usually, sometimes, and occasional. Information of this sort can be put out under the white hat. So, white hat thinking provides discipline and direction. The thinker strives to be more neutral and more objective in the presentation of information. The white, absence of color, also indicates neutrality. Red hat thinking. Wearing the red hat allows the thinker to say, "This is how I feel about the matter." The red hat legitimizes emotions and feelings as an important part of thinking. The red hat makes feelings visible so that they can become part of the thinking map and also part of the value system that chooses the route on the map. The red hat provides a convenient method for a thinker to switch in and out of the feeling mode in a way that is not possible without such a device. The red hat allows a thinker to explore the feelings of others by asking for a red hat view. When a thinker is using the red hat, there should never be any attempt to justify feelings or to provide a logical basis for them. The red hat covers two broad types of feeling. First, there are the ordinary emotions as we know them, ranging from the strong emotions, such as fear and dislike, to the more subtle ones, such as suspicion. Secondly, there are the complex judgments that go into subtle feelings, such as hunch, intuition, sense, taste, aesthetic feeling, and other not visibly justified types of feelings. Next is black hat thinking. Black hat thinking is specifically concerned with negative assessment. The black hat thinker points out what is wrong, incorrect, and in error, how something does not fit experience or accepted knowledge, why something will not work, risks and dangers, faults in a design. Black hat thinking is not argumentative and should never be seen as such. It is an objective attempt to put the negative elements onto the map. Black hat thinking may judge an idea against the past to see how well it fits what is known. It may also project an idea into the future to see what might fail or go wrong. Black hat thinking can ask negative questions, but it should not be used to cover negative indulgence or feelings. This is a red hat function. Yellow hat thinking. Yellow hat thinking is positive and constructive. The yellow color symbolizes sunshine, brightness, and optimism. Yellow hat thinking is concerned with positive assessment, just as black hat thinking is concerned with negative assessment. Yellow hat thinking covers a positive spectrum, ranging from the logical and practical at one end to dreams, visions, and hopes at the other end. Yellow hat thinking seeks to put forward soundly based optimism, but is not restricted to this, provided other types of optimism are appropriately labeled. Yellow hat thinking is constructive and generative. Concrete proposals and suggestions come from yellow hat thinking. Yellow hat thinking can be speculative and opportunity seeking. Yellow hat thinking also permits visions and dreams. Green hat thinking. The person who puts on the green hat is going to use the mechanisms of creative thinking. Everyone involved is required to treat the output as a creative output. Ideally, both the thinker and listener should be wearing green hats. The green color symbolizes fertility, growth, and the nurturing of seeds. The search for alternatives is a fundamental aspect of green hat thinking. There is a need to go beyond the known, the obvious, and the satisfactory. The green hat thinker pauses at any point to consider whether there might be alternative ideas. There need be no reason for this pause. In green hat thinking, the format of movement replaces that of judgment. The thinker seeks to move forward from one idea in order to reach a new idea. Provocation is an important part of green hat thinking. A provocation is used to take us out of our usual patterns of thinking. And finally, blue hat thinking. The blue hat is the control hat. The blue hat thinker organizes the thinking itself. Blue hat thinking is thinking about the thinking needed to explore the subject. The blue hat thinker is like the conductor of the orchestra. The blue hat thinker calls for the use of the other hats. The blue hat thinker defines the subjects toward which the thinking is to be directed. The blue hat thinker sets the focus, defines the problems, and shapes the questions. The blue hat monitors the thinking, enforces discipline, and ensures that the rules of the game are observed. Blue hat thinking stops argument and insists on map type of thinking. Blue hat thinking may be used for occasional interjections, which request one or another hat. Blue hat thinking may also be used to set up a step-by-step sequence of thinking operations. Blue hat thinking determines the thinking tasks that are to be carried through and is responsible for summaries, overviews, and conclusions. These can take place from time to time in the course of the thinking, and also at the end. Congratulations! Well done! You have now completed the whole course. How did it go? Any feedback? If you liked this course, perhaps you'd like to share a testimonial or a review. You can also share your feedback if you have something you'd like to suggest for improvement. Just send us a private message so we can take that feedback and improve our content. Thank you very much for your time and dedication. I wish you good luck with your business.